True gold. So at Sangha night we've been following this theme for a while of looking at this movement of Buddhism called the Vajrayana, the way of the diamond thunderbolt, which is also known as the Tantra, which I've written up there. So the Tantric Buddhism. So we've been looking at that for a while and exploring some great Tantric figures, stories, myths and symbols, especially symbols. So we've been doing that for a while, but at the moment our Tantric series is overlapping with our Dharma fortnight. So Dharma is a word meaning generosity, which I've written up there. It means generosity, a very, very important Buddhist ethical precept and Buddhist principle. So obviously it's not just a Buddhist principle, but it's important in the Buddhist practice. It's a bit better. Good. So as you're probably aware, everything at this centre, which is a Buddhist activity, is run on a Dharma basis, a generosity basis. So all of the Dharma classes run at this Buddhist centre are free. So anybody can access them no matter how much money they have or don't have. And the Buddhist centre runs on that basis. So that's really incredible. That's a really kind of subversive way of running any sort of project. So we're spending 2 weeks celebrating that fact. Celebrating the fact that we exist as this kind of institution which thumbs its nose at the fact that you need to pay for what we're getting. Like we're just being generous and there are benefits. And so we're celebrating that. And we started off a couple of weeks ago on Sangha Day with our abundance puja, where a lot of us brought goods and put them on the shrine, which then got given to a food bank. And then last week, Vajrayana gave us a talk about, he introduced Padmasambhava, which I've written there as well, Padmasambhava's magical pure land of Udayana. And he talked about how this magical pure land, where the Dharma, everything is easy and beautiful, we can create that and live in that through our own practice of Dharma, of generosity. So that's the Dharma fortnight so far. So tonight, I'm going to continue the Dharma fortnight with this talk called Pure True Gold. And I'm going to continue with the theme of Padmasambhava for a little while. And remind us about a story from his life, which those of us who've been coming regularly will hopefully remember. But for the rest of you, I'll just recap the important points of it. So Padmasambhava is an important Buddhist figure. He's an enlightened being, but he is a fierce-looking enlightened being. He was a bit of a magician, a bit of a guru magician, very important in Buddhist tradition, full of fierce energy in service of the Dharma. And he lived in India. But Tibet had a king who wanted to convert Tibet to the Buddhist religion, but he couldn't do it. And he couldn't do it because it was being overrun by demons who didn't want to have the Dharma in Tibet. They didn't want it. So what they did is they were very mischievous and they did all they could to prevent the spreading of the Dharma in Tibet. And one of the ways this is symbolised is the story of their attempt, the Tibetans' attempt to build a monastery. So the story goes that in the day, the humans would build the monastery. They'd bring all the bricks and everything, try and build the monastery, do lots of work, and then in the night, all the demons would come and they would take down all the work that had been done in the day by the humans. And so the untamed demons of Tibet, they were just not interested in the project of the Dharma. They weren't interested in the project of building the monasteries at all. They worshipped other values, they worshipped other things. So just like the rest of Padmasambhava's life story, we needn't take this episode too literally. We don't need to think about literal demons, literally doing things. So we've explored the symbolism of these demons in other talks. And particularly we focused on what demons might look like in our own experience, how we might have bits of ourselves that are trying to get in the way of our Dharma practice and our Dharma lives, and how these aspects of ourselves need to be brought on side and tamed. So we've looked at that before. Things like our anger or our deepest passions need to be brought on side. But I'd like to suggest or kind of bring into our awareness a different way we might think about this story, these demons. So we could think about this situation in Tibet as going on in our own society here. So in a way we could think about our own Buddhist practice. So we're Buddhist, we live in this society, and we're trying to do the best that we can. So we go to work, we live amongst our families and our friends, and in this society at large. We're trying to build our monastery in the context of all of that. But we live in a society which frankly does not want a monastery to be built. It's not that conducive really. When you look at it, the society we live in isn't that conducive to Buddhism and to the building of the monasteries. It's full of, the society is not worshipping Buddhism as it's worshipping other things, other values, you could say other gods, other religions are present in society. I was thinking, what are some of those things that society as a whole worships most? You might have your own ideas. So I wondered about status being something that is worshipped in this society, celebrity being something that is worshipped in this society, power, the god of power, something that's very prevalent in our society. What else have I written? The god of sensual pleasure, ease and comfort, something that's very, very important for lots and lots of people, that we could see as almost being worshipped as a religion, the religion of the pursuit of pleasure. So these are things which people, well, hopefully, this is resonating with some of you. You're thinking, yeah, actually, I can sort of see that in our society. But I'd like to suggest that the biggest religion in this respect, the thing that is worshipped over and above all of these other things, is the material wealth and possessions, and in a word, money. So tonight I'm going to talk about money, something that isn't talked about very much. So mostly I'm going to focus on our own relationships with money, but I want to start by saying something about society's attitudes to and relationships with money as a whole, because that's the context in which we're practicing. It's a society that we live in. So firstly, I want to make the point that since we've been born, those of us certainly who are from this culture have lived in a society with a capitalist economy. And a capitalist economy, the greatest good for a capitalist economy is money and profit. And that's something which has just been in the air for all of us since we were conceived. We've just been breathing it in with the air. And secondly, it's worth knowing that the success of this country is measured in what's called GDP, the gross domestic product. So if you're a bit of an economic ignoramus like I am, I'll just tell you that what that basically means is that our society is permeated by a culture where we value things in terms of the success of our country is evaluated by wealth. And that again is something which is just in the air. It's just in the air. It's the water that we swim in. If something's profitable, if something's worth money, it's worth something. And then, of course, these things are backed up by a very voracious advertising industry where you can't possibly look in any direction without being told in some form that if we don't have money and spend money, we can't possibly have any chance of being happy. So that is our conditions. So it's quite tough conditions, really, to be building any sort of monasteries. And I was reading, actually, on the internet, apparently GDP is coming in for a bit of a hammering at the moment because, actually, people are starting to realise that it's a bit ridiculous measuring everything according to money because it also doesn't take into account people's happiness, the state of the environment, the living conditions of people, literally only cares about how much money we've got. But even though that's changing now, it hasn't been changing for a while and it's just been around, it's been in the air all of our lives. And if, like me, when you start to hear people talking about money and economics and GDP, you think, oh my God, yawn. Don't switch off because that's what I would do. But actually we can't afford to switch off because this is our conditioning. It's so strong that if we don't make it conscious in ourselves, we've got no chance of doing anything different. We'll just keep doing the same things we've always done. If we know that we're being conditioned by it, we've got much more of a choice to do something else. So, for example, I was thinking about this clock, which I bought. because it has a timer so I can see how many minutes I've been talking for. It's going to make my life, it's going to solve all my problems. So I bought this clock. And I went online to buy this clock. And I thought I was doing quite well because I thought I won't go to Amazon because Amazon's supposed to be quite unethical. So I chose a different website. But that's where it ended. My only other consideration was how much value for money is it? And I thought about that. I thought I did not even think to have any other criteria. That was it. It's like the thought of having any other criteria almost is unthinkable to me, because that's how I've been taught to think since I was a baby. That if you do something that's not value for money, it's just stupid, isn't it? So, so it's worth thinking, actually, about that. Also, I would like to acknowledge that I am talking about money, and we're really weird about money. Like, a lot of us have really weird, complicated relationships with money. And I was quite nervous to be giving a talk about money, because although we all have money, we all spend money, we all need money, and we all probably spend quite a significant portion of our time thinking about how to have enough of it, we spend very, very little time actually having any sorts of sensible discussions about it. And actually, it's a little bit of a taboo, really. Like, people just don't talk, you just wouldn't talk about how much money you earn, would you, really? It's just, like, who would do that? Like, I was talking to a friend on the phone, and she said she went on an event about sex, money, and other things, and she said she found talking about sex much, much easier than talking about money. Money was much more of a taboo in that room for people than sex was. Which, if you think about it, is just weird. Just weird. We can be really squeamish about talking about money, and I count myself in that, definitely. I personally prefer never to think about money at all. When I do, there's a combination of anxiety, confusion, and aversion, I think, describes my general response to money. Sometimes I end up just wishing it didn't exist and we all could just barter goods. And some of you might have that same response, you might resonate with that, and some of you might have a completely different response to money. But I'd be surprised if anyone had a completely neutral response to it, actually. Money can potentially provoke a range of really strong and conflicting emotions between us and within us. And that will depend on who we are, our personalities, our conditioning, how we've grown up, what we've been exposed to, our education, and whether or not we happen to have any of it at this particular moment as well. Maybe if we don't have any, or we feel like we don't have any, or we feel like we don't have enough, we might possibly feel a bit kind of jealous or envious of people who do have some money. And yet, we might have some weird guilt around the fact we feel jealous because we're Buddhist and we're not really supposed to care about that sort of thing, we think. Or we might have some money, or we might have lots of money, and we might feel some weird guilt about that. That somehow money is a really un-Buddhist and unspiritual thing, and it's a terrible thing to have money, and we need to get very defensive about the fact that we have a right to have money. In the same way that Americans get a bit defensive about their right to bear arms, we might have that around money in ourselves. So any of this or other things might be going on for you, and I think maybe precisely because it does create so much weirdness in us, it's such a kind of loaded, that it's quite good to open it out and think, actually, what is our relationship with money? And if you're having a reaction to what I'm saying, very, very good, examine that reaction, because that'll be telling you something very valuable about what your personal relationship is with money. If we don't talk about these things, we can't shine a dharmic light on them. It will be like the rest of our life is in the light of the Dharma, and then we've got some weird kind of behaviours over here to do with money that we're not able to think about. Because what happened in Tibet was that the demons were tamed, the unruly demons were tamed by Padmasambhava. And the way that he tamed them is he came into relationship with them, he engaged with them, and he brought them into awareness. And that's how he managed to tame them. So the demons wreaked havoc when they were left underground. So the demons of our money demons will also wreak havoc in our Dharma lives if we don't bring them into the light and engage with them. So I was thinking that it's very fitting to be talking about money as part of a tantric series, because if you remember from the series, we talked a lot about how the Tantra is not really concerned with big, long treatises about things, lots of words and concepts and complicated books. It's interested in direct, lived experience and it's particularly concerned in communicating in terms of things like stories, myths and symbols, and particularly symbols. And so I think it's very appropriate to be talking about money, because I think that money is one of the richest symbols that we have in our society. It means so many different things. It affects the consciousness of us and society as a whole so strongly, and it influences so much of our thought and behaviour. And it has such a wide variety of possible associations. And I've been wondering actually, while I've been writing this talk, whether it's precisely the fact that it does have such a bewildering array of different and potentially conflicting symbolism for us, that it causes so much confusion and strangeness within us. And a lot of the things that it could potentially symbolise are quite strong emotional drivers for us. So I wrote a list of all the things that I thought that it might symbolise. So I think money could symbolise any of these or all of these at once. Status, safety, security, power, comfort and ease, sense of self-worth, success, what sort of person we are, pleasure, love, potential. Any others you'd like to add? Freedom, yeah. That's a good one. So these are strong values for us with deep emotional responses. So it's not surprising we get so confused in our relationship with money. So as I mentioned, my own relationship with money is not very straightforward. I find a very uneasy relationship with money. And when I looked at why this is, I think it's because it has such conflicting, I'm so conflicted in my symbolism around it. So I thought, for me, the having of money is something to do with security and safety, and also the possibility and potential of enjoyment and pleasure, being able to do things I like, and that is also associated with freedom. So these are all quite positive associations. But also, I thought I've got quite a strong aversive response to money, so I thought, where's that coming from? And I thought that actually, also for me, money can symbolise power being used in a negative way to control and manipulate. It can symbolise suffering, the suffering of people being exploited, consumerism, and therefore a lack of freedom as well. So in a way, those things are completely contradictory. It symbolises both freedom and a lack of freedom. It symbolises joy and ease, and also pain and suffering. So no wonder I don't want to go anywhere near it, and I get very confused. And I think the range of things it will symbolise will be different for each of us. It will be different for each of us, and it will influence our emotional relationship with money. So as well as being an important symbol, it also felt very important to talk about money in a series about the Tantra because of energy. So a few weeks ago, Vajrayana gave a talk about, I can't remember even what he was talking about, but one of the things he said was the Tantra sees everything in terms of money. No, he didn't say that. Everything in terms of energy, that's what he said. He said that. Everything in terms of energy. And so it seems very important to be talking about money, because money is possibly one of the most potent sources of energy available to us in this society. So I want to say at this point, very categorically, that from the Buddhist standpoint, there is nothing wrong with money. Nothing wrong at all with money. It's a neutral energy. That is it, it's a neutral energy. And interestingly, I researched this, what the Buddha had to say about money, and I read a sutta, which means discourse. Let's see if it's on here. Called the Adya Sutta, which was a discourse given by the Buddha to one of his most wealthy and generous lay followers, Anathapindika. And if we know anything about the Buddhist suttas, we'll have heard his name before, because quite often you remember the Buddha sitting, talking to, at the beginning it says, "Thus have I heard, at one time the Blessed One was sitting in Jeta's Grove in Anathapindika's park." So this is a piece of land that was gifted to the Buddhist Sangha by this wealthy man, Anathapindika. So in this sutta, the Buddha enumerates 5 benefits of wealth. So he doesn't try and counterbalance that with anything, that's it. 5 benefits of wealth. Being able to maintain members of your family and household, maintain your friends and associates, to keep yourself safe by warding off calamities, to pay respect to those worthy of it, and to give it to the Sangha. So those are the 5 benefits that the Buddha enumerates. So he seems to be quite clear about it. His 2 different attitudes to money are, if you're a monk or if you've left home, you're a renunciant, you need to not have any money. If you're a lay person, as long as you're earning it skillfully and spending it skillfully, that's the important thing, and money itself is a good. But I was interested, actually, that the Buddha's not interested in money for itself. The 5 things that he enumerates are all ways of using it for the good, ways of spending it for the good, not ways that it's good to be hoarded or kept. So I like this image of money being like a flow. Like if it's energy, we can imagine it flowing, the flow of energy. A bit like, I like this image of a big river flowing along. The energy of this riverly money flowing in and then being distributed in all these lovely tributaries going out into the world. So not getting stuck in a dam, getting all kind of congealed and stagnant and lots of rotting wood and stuff. It's flowing, lovely, clear, beautiful river. So the Buddha's clear that money is can potentially bring great good to oneself and others, and that seems right to me. Because whether we like it or not, and I usually don't like this, we do all need money if we're going to eat, if we're going to have a house to live in, and if we're going to have any other goods, we're going to exchange it for any other goods or commodities, which includes medicine as well in this society. We need it to pay for all the public services we benefit from, without which the country would just be chaotic. We need it if we're going to travel anywhere or do pretty much anything. We need some money. And we need it for the Dharma. Like, we can't get away from this. If there wasn't money in this Buddhist centre, it would close instantly. And so those of you who give to the Sangha, that's enabling us to be sitting here now. It's enabling us to give you baked potatoes and cups of tea, to put the heating on, to pay the council tax, and just to exist. And for anybody who wants to walk in off the street and hear the Dharma. So that's what money does. So it's a powerful source of good and valuable energy. We all need it, and I'm not going to stand here telling you it's a bad thing to have money, because that's just not true. It's not a terrible and unspiritual thing, and if you're having a big guilt trip because you've got some, you can just let that go right now. Okay, so then I hear you ask, so if there's nothing wrong with money, what's the problem, Dharma? Why are you even talking about it? It's fine. So there's nothing wrong with money in itself. It's a neutral energy, just like any other energy. But what we do with it, that is not neutral. It's not neutral. It can be used well, like any other energy, or it can be misused, like any other energy. Let's think about those demons of Tibet again. So I can imagine in my imagination, that there's lots and lots of energy in those demons. They're running around creating all sorts of mischief with lots and lots of energy. But it's not doing any good. It's not energy which is helping. It's not being used in the service of the Dharma. So it's interesting that in the Dharma, energy per se is not necessarily seen as a good thing. It's what we do with it that's important. We have to employ that skillfully. And that's what Virya is. So those of you coming on the Sangha retreat will hear much more about Virya. Virya is a quality which is energy being used in pursuit of what is skillful. And that's what Buddhism is concerned with, not just energy in a kind of jumping around sort of sense. So in Tibet, the energy of the demons was not being used in pursuit of the good. It was being used to hamper the growth of beings and not to increase it, by pulling down the monasteries, by getting in the way of the Dharma. So it's important that we examine how we're using our energy of money, and whether we're using it to build the metaphorical monastery of the Dharma practice in our lives, or whether we're using it actually, unwittingly, to pull down the monastery. Whether, we could say, maybe slightly provocatively, whether we are worshipping the Dharma, or whether we're worshipping money itself. So the problem isn't that we think that money's good, it's when we think it's the best good, it's the highest good, and we start relating to it, we treat it as if it's the highest good. when we start to prioritise our financial considerations over our ethical values and principles, or what's most highest to us. And that's when money becomes the master over us and we cease to be the master over it, rather than the other way around. And in Buddhist terminology, you could say it's when we start going for refuge to it. So we talk about going for refuge as a sort of shorthand for looking for our safety or security in an ultimate way in things. So as a Buddhist, usually we would be thinking about looking for our security and ultimate happiness in the three jewels. So the Buddha, his teachings, and the community of Buddhists, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. But we could think that when we're not doing that, we're actually going for refuge to money. So that's a different, the other option, I suppose. So I'd like to give you an example from my own life, a quite recent example of when I went to refuge to money. So the story began when I bought online a pair of boots. If anyone in my Mitchell would have heard this story, so apologies. So I bought these boots online. They're great boots. So they've got elephants on them. And I like elephants particularly because I meditate on the Blue Buddha Akshobhya, and he has elephants in his visualization practice. So I thought, oh great, I'll get these boots with elephants on. That's a great thing to do. So they were ordered from America, so I had to wait quite a lot of time, like weeks and weeks for them to arrive. So I had a lot of time to observe my mental states in the intervening weeks. And I noticed every morning I would wake up with a sense of anticipation. Will my boots come today? And it wasn't just, it was something a bit more than that. It was like, will my boots come? And then I'll just be happy in some sort of lasting and deep way. Maybe I'll have a sort of deeper transcendental connection with Akshobhya when my boots have arrived. I'll just be sort of less unhappy generally when my boots have arrived. It was, slightly parodying that, but not much actually. That was slightly going on in my experience. I got very impatient for them to arrive. And the poor boots, because of course when they arrived, they were lovely boots, but I couldn't help being disappointed because they're just boots. they're just boots. They can't actually make my life better in those ways. They can't make my life better in the way that I was expecting them to. In that moment, I was actually going for refuge to my boots, and not to the three jewels, which you'll see is probably my aspiration in life, is to go for refuge, not to boots. I was expecting them to end my suffering in some deep and lasting way. You could say that I was being over-literal in my symbols to do with my boots. So for me, the boots symbolised a connection to the transcendental because it symbolised my connection with Akshobhya, who I love and connects me with my Dharma practice. And but also it symbolised some sort of relief from existential dukkha, from this kind of unsatisfactoriness of just being alive. And they symbolise some sort of peace of mind or a complete inner satisfaction and contentment. So it had this symbolism, and in a way, well, that's okay. But then the problem is that I got really literal about that, and I literally expected my boots to provide me with inner peace. And of course, boots, however lovely they are, can't do this. I'll just pause while I answer the door. So we've all been hearing since our very first week of our very first introductory course that happiness doesn't come from things, it only comes from inside. We've probably all heard that many, many times. So I can't, in short, I can't use money to buy my way out of dukkha. None of us can use money to buy our way out of dukkha. So we all know this, but we don't. We don't know it. We don't really know it. Even if we've been coming here, or we've been Buddhist and other traditions, even if we've been years and years and years, we've been ordained for decades, even if we've done the introductory course dozens and dozens of times, we can't make the mistake of thinking we're above this and that we know it. Because we might know it intellectually, but our behaviour tells a different story. And we might not always notice it because it's quite sneaky and subtle. It might not always be as obvious and gross as my boots example, but it's sort of in there. I bet I'm not the only person in this room who occasionally catches themselves fixating on an object or an experience and catching a little thought which is just, well, I've just got that thing, that will be enough. I can relax then. I won't need anything else. I can stop. I'll be content. I'll be at ease. It might be very, very subtle, but I bet it's there. I bet it's there for all of us. We all believe on some level we're going to find that happiness outside of ourselves and that we can buy that. And I think if we didn't think that, we'd just be content, completely content all the time. We would never feel that we needed anything. And I think, personally, that would be a state of enlightenment, actually. So I think that until that state, that's always going to be going on for us. And yeah, so the thing about money is that we need money to get these things that we think are going to get us happiness. And if we don't have that money to exchange for the boots or the car or the house or the phone or whatever it is, or the jacket, then that happiness is not available to us. That's what society tells us, and I think that's what we all believe on some level. So I think that the ultimate meaning, the ultimate symbol of money is that it stands for the possibility that we will find something in the world that will finally and totally eradicate all of our unsatisfactoriness, that will be the answer to our suffering. And that it represents and symbolises the possibility that we can actually buy our way out of dukkha. I think that's what money really symbolises. And when I look at the way that I spend money, I think that I see that most of what I buy falls into this category, actually. Because once I've got somewhere to live, I've bought my food, I've got medicines that I want, and basic clothing. Everything else I buy on top of that is me trying to alleviate my dukkha. And I'd like to suggest that that might be the case for more of us than just me. And of course, it's never enough. Like, whatever we buy, it's never going to alleviate our dukkha in that way. It's never enough. So that's all true, and now I'd like to caveat it a little bit by saying, I'm not saying that money can't buy anything, because obviously it can. It can buy stuff. And quite aside from the basics of life, like food and clothing and shelter, it can bring us pleasure, and it does bring us pleasure, and it would be really, really silly for me to stand here and try and tell you that it doesn't, because we all know that money can bring us pleasure. And I think the problem is we just need to be aware of the limits of what it can do. It brings us pleasure, but where does that stop? So with my money, I exchanged my money for boots, and that was lovely. I got some pleasure from my boots. They're fun, they keep my feet warm, they're very comfortable, and they have elephants on. But they don't bring me inner peace and a sense of self-worth. So they go so far, but not as far as I think they would. If we have money and we exchange it for a beautiful house, what will that give us? It will give us a lovely place to live, comfortable, maybe warm, beautifully, like a sense of kind of ease in the lovely decoration of the house, and all the lovely mod cons. It won't bring us a sense of existential ease. It won't bring us a kind of lasting sense of security, because just like everything else, houses are impermanent and they won't last forever. A new smartphone, very, very useful if we want to phone people, very useful if we want to access the internet and maybe play Scrabble with our friends on the little thing. Not going to make me free from dukkha by making everything easier and faster. And actually my experience is it makes everything more complicated and difficult because it makes everything faster. And if we have a flash car, that's going to be a beautiful way to travel, it's going to elicit admiration from people, but it won't bring us love, and it won't bring us true and genuine respect from other people. So there's an end to what we can buy with our money. Actually, I just thought the Beatles say, you can't buy me love. That's it, you can buy stuff, but you can't buy me love. I'll just throw this example in. So we've got a kettle in our kitchen in the community. It's a very bad kettle. And every time I try and pour water out of it, the water goes everywhere. And every time I make myself a cup of tea, I think, I must buy a new kettle. If I have a new kettle, life would just be so much better. And I think with that, I'm thinking if I get this kettle, somehow my ill will and irritation will just vanish. Of course it won't. I'll just get annoyed about something else. So we can't buy our way out of our bad mental states either, sadly. So When we relate to things in this way, that they're going to give us something they can't possibly give us, we could describe that as a neurotic relationship. A neurotic relationship. And so that's me with the boots. I was being neurotic about my boots because I thought that it was going to give me something it couldn't give me. And when we have this neurotic relationship with things, it can only lead to disappointment and suffering. And unless we clock that and make it conscious, we're actually going to unconsciously just keep repeating the same thing again and again. When it doesn't work with the kettle, I'll start looking about what other implement I need to buy in the kitchen that's going to make my life fully happy and safe. So we could say that when we act out of this belief that we can buy our happiness, that we can buy our way out of dukkha, we can, coming back to energy, we can think of this as what it means to misuse the energy of money. So we could think of an appropriate way of using that energy of money as being putting it at the service of what is most valuable to us and what is most important to us. So if we're here, probably one of the things that's going to feature quite highly in that is the Dharma, the possibility of growth for ourselves and for everybody else, the possibility of freeing ourselves from our old ways of being that cause us suffering, the possibility of liberating ourselves from greed, hatred and delusion. But instead, if we use money in this neurotic way, actually, rather than helping ourselves with this project, with what's highest to us, actually we're undermining it. We're actually blocking our own efforts. So how do we do that? So let's think about when we do buy something like that. Actually what we're doing is rather than undermining and eroding our craving, we're actually increasing our craving. If we act from this general attitude of grasping and wanting, then that's what's going to strengthen in our being. We're going to do that more and more automatically, more and more of the time. And because the money and the things it buys are never going to satisfy us, not those deepest longings that we want it to satisfy, we're going to be compelled to earn more and more and spend more and more in a never-ending and very, very expensive quest for the end to suffering, which will lead us into stress and disappointment and yet more craving. So acting neurotically with money will lead us to more craving. It also leads us into more delusion, so away from wisdom and towards delusion. It leads us towards delusion because we're acting out of the false belief that we can get our lasting happiness from things outside of ourselves. That's what we're enacting by the way we're spending our money. And it also suggests we're acting out of a belief in permanence. So we kind of, impermanence is very important as a Buddhist teaching, but if we think something's going to finally make an end of our suffering, this one thing, we must think that one thing is permanent. So you can see how if we act in this way with money, if we use money in this way, we're eroding all the good work we're doing the rest of the time in our Dharma lives by the way that we're spending our money, the way we're using that energy in our lives. So what can we do about it? I don't know, that sounds all really heavy. So that's the situation. We're all doing that all the time. So what can we do about it? What can we do about it? So I'd like to suggest that because we're so heavily conditioned around it, and it's such a natural thing for us to do, what we need to do to undermine it is to make some very kind of deliberate efforts to do stuff in a different direction, to make different choices, so that we could say, so we're making a message to ourselves and our consciousness that we're not throwing in with the demons that are trying to pull down the monasteries. Actually, we're throwing our weight in with the people who are trying to build the monasteries up. And we can do that by becoming more conscious of our relationship with money and training ourselves to more and more make financial decisions, not on the basis of financial gain, but on the basis of the ethical precepts that we follow. And I'd like to suggest 4 areas that we might like to consider bringing this into our lives. So how can we stop tearing down the monastery? So the first thing we consider is, how do I make my money? So we all make money somehow. So we consider, how do I make my money? We could ask ourselves, is the way that I make my money in accordance with my highest values? Is it in accordance with my highest values of life? Might there be a different way I could make my money, which might be more in accordance with the highest values of my life? And in that way, putting my ethics above my money, above financial considerations. Do I work more than I need to? Could I work less? Could I earn less? So for some of us that'll be immediately no, but for some of us we might be, yeah, actually I could take a pay cut, so I could work less, and then to potentially devote all that extra time to Dharma practice, for example, or other things which are important to us, our highest values. We could go and retreat more, for example. So that's the first thing we could think about. How do I make my money? How do I make my money? The second thing, how do I spend my money? So we all spend our money too. So how could I spend my money? So we could notice what we're spending our money on. And somebody... the 11th hour. I'll get points for you. Great. So yeah, how do I spend my money? So I was listening to a talk by somebody about this, and they said that one thing they'd done is they'd got their bank statement and just looked at all the things they actually spent their money on, and apparently it was very revealing. So we can examine what we really spend our money on, and we could ask ourselves honestly, is the way I'm spending my money really serving my deepest aspirations and values? Is it really? Could my money be used more effectively to support what's most dear to me? So we could ask ourselves those questions. So next time I go to Costa and I buy a cup of coffee, which costs me £3 or whatever it is these days, I could think to myself, do I really, is this the best use of this £3, or could I go and give it to somebody who needs this £3, which would be more in line with my values, for example? You could think, do I really need this thing that I'm spending my money on? Because if we remember that this is energy that we're using, so is this a wise way to use my energy? Or is this an energy that could be put to a better use? Is it excess energy that could be put to a better use? So yeah, we can think about whether we need to rethink about the ways we're distributing the energy of our money in our lives. So you could think about it in these ways. So you could think about reducing the amount of things that we buy. So I know that I could definitely live with less clothes, but I keep buying them because I really like them. But I could live with less, definitely live with less clothes. So we could reduce the amount of things we buy. Or we could spend more money on things like going on retreats, buying Dharma books, or other things that support our practice. We can think about giving more money away. Dharma, the practice of Dharma, is a very, very potent insight practice. That's the magic word. It's an insight practice, which Vajrayana talked about last week, because it benefits other people materially, but it also erodes our fixed sense of self that's cut off from people, and erodes wrong views, such as that we can get our happiness from outside us. I was thinking, if you were a bit cynical, you could say that giving Dharma is a bit like buying insight. But I thought that if you think about it like that, it probably won't work. But I quite liked that anyway. And you could think about using, investing money imaginatively to build a Pure Land. So there's a couple of examples. So some Sangha members who had some money gave it in loans to the women's community so that we could buy a house. So Mokshitara and Satyajyoti and me and how many other women, 4 other women, live in this house, which has manifested purely on the generosity of the Sangha. So people imaginatively investing in a way to create an amazing environment for people to practice the Dharma. And also, I believe that quite some of the funds to open the Dharma Cafe also came from Sangha members, is that right? So 2 really amazing projects which only came about because people gave money. So there's all sorts of things we could do with our money. So that's the second one, how could I spend my money? The third area is about ethics. So we could ask ourselves, what are my ethics when I'm buying stuff? Like, what am I thinking of? Do I really think about the ethical implications of the purchase I'm making? Is that uppermost in my mind when I'm pressing buy on the computer or I'm handing over my credit card? So we can practice ways of prioritising our ethical practice over our pocket. So we could, for example, buy from charities or companies which give money to charities, or which are ethical even when it's more expensive, or when the thing doesn't meet our preference so much. We could think about paying more for ethically made or ethically sourced products. We could think, if we can't find an ethically sourced product, can we do without it? Or could we find an alternative? So basically, ways of acting in a purchasing way that minimise harm in the world. So that's thinking about our ethics. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, we can really think about, what do I think I'm buying? What do I think I'm buying when I buy boots, when I buy my coffee, when I buy my next piece of clothing, when I buy whatever it is that you buy? Why am I buying it? Really ask yourself, what do you think you're going to get? And notice if you feel disappointed. Very important, notice if you feel disappointment, because that's showing you that you did think it was going to give you something else and it hasn't. Very good learning when that happens. And it's also a very good clue to what values it actually is that we really need to cultivate inside us, which might include things like love or respect or contentment or satisfaction. Obviously we can't buy these, but we do need them, so they have to come from inside us. So yeah, those are the 4 ways we can think of, we could talk about and we could think about. So just to sum up, I hope it's been useful to open up this subject of money, which is taboo, and I hope not too uncomfortable, or maybe I hope a bit uncomfortable. And hopefully it will deepen our awareness about our relationship with it and how we can become more ethical in relationship to it. But I think if we're going to take away anything, we could take away this, that rather than a bad thing to be avoided, money used wisely can be a massive source of good in the world. It's a great potential energy. And I really like this image of the river. It's like a great river flowing through the world. And its waters, the waters of this river, bring growth. All the different ways the water of this river, everything's growing and flourishing. It's bringing things to growth and to maturity and to beauty, the water of this river. But we need to be careful not to worship the river or to worship the water within the river, but to keep our attention firmly fixed on the beautiful things that grow from it, the beautiful things that grow, but not the mundane things, beauty of the things that grow, although they're not unimportant. Not just the lotus flower or the oak tree or the shiny sports car or the beautiful dress, not just those things, but the true beauty which is liberation of the heart, the true beauty which is infinite compassion for all beings, which is freedom from greed, hatred and delusion. And this is true wealth, this is what true gold really is. And our money, I think, is only worth anything if it's helping to bring this sort of beauty, this true gold, into the world more and more for ourselves and for everybody else. And into a world which so very badly, I think, needs to understand and experience what true gold really is. Thank you very much.